It is episode 49 and the 11th episode of season 3 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I am your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Mike Koomar. Mike, we've had a ton of action over the past week and a couple days since we last talked to him. We're going to try and get through it all. But first, we're going to start off how we always do. And Mike, you got your team of the week here. Tons of choices.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. There were a lot of good choices, but for me, there's only one team that beat two top 10 opponents this week. They did them both at home, and as much as I hate to say it, it's the TCU Horned Frogs are my team of the week, Sean. They did lose last night in a battle against Cincinnati inside the Queen City. But with that being said, TCU got a win against the 9th-ranked Oklahoma Sooners at the time to begin the week, and then concluded with a big-time win against the second-ranked at the time Houston Cougars. Huge win for TCU. Sean, I was pretty low on the Horned Frogs a couple weeks ago, in part because of their lackluster performance in the Diamond Head Classic, but they've proved themselves and more going into this week. Clearly a tournament team. They came in at 19th ranked in the country and might go down after their overtime loss to a really good Cincinnati team. But this TCU team, Sean, is finally heating up. They're looking a lot more competitive, and they're finally scoring the basketball pretty well, too. So doing everything pretty well. I think part of it was they were a beneficiary of Houston struggling a little bit offensively. Houston struggled this week with their 2 losses. But this will be a part of our theme, Sean, with the Big 12. And you don't know what you're going to see each day because there's so many really good tournament teams.
At this point, Mike, if you take a quick look at the Big 12 schedule, there are only 2 teams with more than 5 losses. Every team except for West Virginia, who is at 6-10, and Oklahoma State, who's at 8-9, have 5 or less losses. And at this point, you're not relying on a great conference season to be able to make the big dance. And that's big for what we're going to talk about as the middle teams in this conference in a little bit. But, Mike, they were very, very close to beating Kansas on the road. And they were very, very close to beating Cincinnati on the road.
Should have beat Kansas on the road. Yeah.
And you can argue that they should have won this game against Cincinnati, too. So for a 2-2 stretch, it's about as good as you can feel about a team after that. You know, they beat.
Oh, yeah.
They played the number 2 team in the country at the time twice, should have won one, did win the other, another top 10 win, and then a loss on the road to a Cincinnati team who is certainly looking a lot better than they did at the beginning of the season. A couple more Big 12 storylines, Mike, before we go into where we think the teams stand. Last week, since we last talked, Houston did suffer back-to-back losses. We did say that their road trip to Ames to play Iowa State and to Fort Worth to play TCU, they'd be really, really lucky to get out of there with 2 wins. And even if they just got one, that would be pretty good. They end up dropping both. One by 4 points, one by 1 point. What were your thoughts on Houston? And is this just a rude introduction to the Big 12, or is there a couple things to worry about?
You know, Houston couldn't score the basketball, and they seemed to struggle with Iowa State's physicality earlier on. The Big 12, a much more physical league than you would see in the American Conference. And they really struggled with that. And I think they also struggled with the home crowd in Ames. I mean, that was a fully sold-out crowd, and Iowa State's known to have one of the toughest places to play in the conference at Hilton Coliseum. But they shot 27% from 3-point, just 7 of 26. So really bad in that game. It didn't get any better in Fort Worth either, Sean. They did get 67 more points, so they did score the basketball a little bit better. But once again, 22.2% from 3-point range. So 2 games under 27% is a big issue for them. Another team that's struggling, similar to them shooting the basketball-wise, is Baylor. Baylor's been able to sneak out a couple of wins because they've been improving a lot more on the defensive end. But Baylor dropped a game last night that really made you question how legitimate the Bears are for Final Four consideration, because they gave a game away to Kansas State. Multiple fouls in really key moments, and then going 9 of 19 from the free throw line for Baylor in that game. But getting back to Houston, this is something that they haven't struggled with in their out-of-conference schedule. So we'll see what happens. They'll have a little bit of an easier road this week. They've got Texas Tech tonight at home. Texas Tech, a very good team, by the way, but they get a home game, and then they get to host Central Florida on Saturday. So I think they'll have 2 games to get back on track. But this Big 12 is no joke. I mean, I think you look at this, Sean, and you say that the Big 12 right now has 10 teams in the Big Dance easily, and that's excluding the University of Texas, which could be 11 out of 14 teams.
Yeah,
8 of those teams are ranked.
I'm in the midst of doing a bracket projection, Mike, and to be honest, 12 of the 14 teams have to be considered, at least.
Yeah.
And, Texas and Central Florida are probably not in the field as of now, but they're, a week from being a 10 seed. And Oklahoma State and West Virginia, it might be better for the conference as a whole if they do happen to kind of bottom out, because especially Oklahoma State there, analytic rankings are not great. So if they were to pick up a win, that would, bring a team down a lot of spots. But, you're going to have to take advantage of the games that you're supposed to win. You got to protect your home court, and you've got to win games that when you're the better team. I think you can say Houston's a better team than Iowa State and TCU. No disrespect to them. They're still talented ball clubs, but I think we're going to see a lot of yo-yoing in this conference. Like Iowa State, for example, they hold Houston to 53, and then they hold Oklahoma State to 42, but then they get 87 put on them by BYU yesterday. So I think you take the 2 out of 3 good performances from Iowa State, especially defensively, but at this point, if you do that, if you do well more times than not, I think you're just going to have to live with it in this conference.
Yeah. And this conference is like it's we thought that this conference might lessen its value by adding these 4 teams, and what you've done is add 3 tournament teams. I mean, even you take a look at Cincinnati, the Bearcats, they're 2-2 in conference right now. They could be 4-0, right? They had a 1-point loss to Texas, and that game was back and forth in the last minute. And then against Baylor, they had a 3-point shot that they could have put up and looked really good. It just hit back rim. And that was to win in regulation against the Bears. So, I mean, just so many good teams. Even the ones that aren't ranked, Sean, are really competitive and could make a Sweet 16 run.
Hey, so, Mike, we're going to do a little informal tiering here. So, I think we've got 4 tiers. And now that the Big 12 is at 14 teams, I believe they do have the double bye for the conference tournament, sort of like the Big 10. So, let's do title contenders, people who can back their way into a double bye, middle of the pack trying to sneak a tournament bid, and then the bottom feeders. So, Mike, are we extending the title contenders to more than 3 teams at this point?
Right now I'm going with 2. I'm going with Kansas and Houston, despite their performances last week. Baylor just looked so pathetic against Kansas State on the road. And they really haven't convincingly closed out a game in the Big 12 so far. So I can't put them in the title contenders right now.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Things can change very quickly. And with the unbalanced schedule, as we've said a couple times on here, that there could be a team that's right there at the end that we have in the middle of the pack. But as of now, I think it would be pretty surprising if another team does win the regular season.
The only team, Sean, that I think could actually give some serious consideration, and I'm definitely surprised that I'd be saying it this time of the year, is Texas Tech. They're 3-0 right now in the conference, and given they haven't played the toughest schedule, they've had Oklahoma State and Kansas State at home, and then a nice win on the road against Texas. They've looked really good in all of those wins, and they've been really, really competitive. They've scored the ball well. They've defended well. They've been really physical. So if there was a third team right now, I'd say it'd be Texas Tech. But, like we said, I think it's just Houston and Kansas.
So now let's go to the second tier, which is I'll combine it with going for the double bye and going for a protected seed in the NCAA tournament, which is the top 4 seeds for those who don't know. So, Mike, definitely Baylor should be in there. And I think we can comfortably put Iowa State in there because of their defense.
Yes. Yeah.
And Oklahoma, maybe they've looked okay in Big 12 play, but they did their work in the non-conference. So
yeah,
but anyone else really pushing the double bye there will be 4 teams getting a double bye no matter what. But any other
yeah.
teams that should be in that category?
Texas Tech, I just mentioned how well they've been playing basketball, and yeah, they didn't have the greatest out of conference schedule to brag about. I believe their 2 losses were in November. Lost to Villanova, lost to Butler. Butler was an overtime loss, but
On the
since then
road,
they've responded.
too.
Yeah, on the road too in Indianapolis. So um, I think Texas Tech is absolutely a team that will contend for that double bye, especially. I think that performance on the road in Austin in their first um, conference game of the season was a huge show for how good that they are and how good they can be.
And I think I'm not quite there yet on the Red Raiders. Taking a look at their next 4 games, which Joe Mead likes to do a lot. If you do watch the In a Nutshell podcast, they go to Houston on the road tonight. They host BYU on the road at Oklahoma, on the road at TCU. Those are 4 teams with numbers next to their name, and 3 of them are on the road. If they go 2-2 in those 4 games, I think I'm ready to put them there with you. But
Yeah,
BYU is a team that's pulled off some road victories already, and at this point they're definitely only going to be favored in one of them, and maybe not even that. But I think they're kind of right on the cusp for me. The next tier would be tournament locks, but definitely outside of the top 4 seeds, and I think that's Iowa State and Texas Tech if they do drop a couple games here, and then maybe I don't know if there's another tournament lock yet. Kansas State, Cincinnati, been good. They're definitely not at the bottom of the barrel, but I think that's kind of the next tier.
TCU, yeah, TCU would be close. I think TCU's in between the 2 tiers because of how impressive they've looked.
I do think TCU is probably in that tier too because of their lackluster non-conference and that
Yeah,
for how far away it is from Selection Sunday, that does hold a lot of weight in the committee. I mean, there could be a team at 9-11 or 7 and do they play 18 or 20 games in the Big 12?
play 18.
18.
Yeah,
So
18.
if you're 8-10, and you played a great non-conference and you get some big wins, you could be right there for a 4 or 5 seed. But I don't think that can be the case for TCU.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and then bottom of the barrel at this point, definitely Oklahoma State, West Virginia, and I think you can put Texas there too, and UCF at this point.
Yeah, UCF has that signature win right now. They defeated Kansas, but since then, they competed really well against Brigham Young. We're going to have a battle. UCF going on the road to UT. I think UT's going to win that game. But UCF's going to have opportunities to prove themselves. I just don't think we've seen enough. They embarrassed themselves early on with that 25-point loss at Kansas State. So we'll see. The jury's not out on UCF. They could potentially make a backdoor run at the tournament. But, yeah, right now they're one of the bottom 4 teams in the conference for sure. Texas, I mean, just what is there, right? Max Asmus is playing good basketball, but they're just not performing right now. So I think this UCF game is going to be a pretty good glimpse of where this Longhorns team really is, because their only win outside of Quad 4, Sean, that I'm tracking is a 1-point win on the road at Cincinnati, which is a good win, but
that they very well could have not won.
Good win.
But
yeah, they should not have won. Yeah.
I think Texas is probably the only team in the Big 12 that does not benefit from these extra teams, because if this was a normal Texas team and they could have come in 6th or 7th out of 10 and still been okay and been an 7 or 8 seed in the tournament, but they're just getting dragged down because of how many really good teams there are there. But they've got a couple of opportunities here. Tonight is huge. I think if they drop tonight, we could see this thing spiral. But you win tonight, then you host an in-state rival on Saturday with a single-digit number next to their name, and you can go into your future road games with not having to win. But Mike, I think that's all for the Big 12. And we could probably do that again next week, because chances are the teams will all be looking different, and every 2 or 3 games we're going to see a lot of changes in the schedule.
I mean, how exciting is this conference to watch? I shudder every week because I got to play all these teams, but this is such an impressive league.
It really is, and in the past, really the only conference that has had this many good teams, a 14-team conference, would be the Big Ten, but they did not have as many top elite
Yeah,
level teams that the
no.
Big 12
I think you have
has.
to go back to, the Big East of 2009, 2010. But even those Big East conferences had several really bad teams at the bottom, a la Rutgers, South Florida, DePaul, etc. You don't have
So,
it.
Mike, we're good for Big 12 talk for now, but there's a reason why
Yeah,
we gave it the first third of the show to that, is because it needs to be talked about, and we there's
yeah,
tons of
absolutely.
games, and yesterday I wanted to do a post, but all four games were worth talking about, so I threw them all in one post, and I think that's what we're gonna roll with for the Big 12 the rest of the year. Now we're gonna switch it over to the Big East, and we're gonna lead off with a team that very well could have been back-to-back Team of the Week selections, and that would be the Seton Hall Pirates. They are the top of the pile right now, Mike. Um, the week before was their really good week with road wins at ranked Providence and at home to Marquette. And since we last went, they beat Seton Hall on the road, or they are Seton Hall. They beat Georgetown on the road, they beat Butler on the road, and they took care of St. John's at home. Seton Hall looks to be definitely a top 25 team at this point, and they've got another chance to do it against Creighton on Saturday. But Mike, what are your thoughts on the Pirates?
Yeah, I mean, what a difference a month can make for Seton Hall. Last month, we thought this team was dead in the water. Now they're 6-1 in the conference. I don't know if anybody of our listeners or viewers caught the game against St. John's last night, but Seton Hall put up a 26 to nothing run from the end of the first half to the second half. And I know Rick Pitino wasn't there on the bench coaching his team due to COVID, but with that being said, how impressive has the Seton Hall team? A team that we were talking about a few weeks ago that just had no depth, seemingly. I mean, now they've just got everything going. And it's not just a one-man show anymore for Seton Hall. They're playing really good collective team basketball, and not just relying on Kadari Richmond. He was the third leading scorer tonight, or actually the fourth leading scorer against St. John's. So I think that is incredibly, it shows how impressive Seton Hall has been. Playing with seven guys, and all seven guys playing pretty well right now.
Yeah, Kadari definitely, had a great game at Butler and kind of carried them across the
Yeah,
line with some really tough buckets. But he was 4 of 14 from the field yesterday, and they had no issues at all. It
no issues.
ended up being a 15-point win, but the St. John's reserves actually hit a bunch of threes at the end. This game was over real quick after halftime. It was tied 24-24 at the under four. Seton Hall goes on a 14-0 run to end the half up 14, and then they continue that run, as you said, into the second half. And just like that, it was 50-24. But St. John's, Steve Masiello is the acting head coach. He's had plenty of experience. I just think it was Seton Hall's day. I don't know how much of an impact Rick Pitino would have. That's a lot of former MAC matchup for those who are
Yeah,
really in the weeds. With Holloway used to be at St. Peter's and Masiello used to be at Manhattan. So St. John's, I think they're okay. They just had a really, really tough night at the office. Great defense from the Pirates in this one. But Mike, there's another game going on right now with the other team that has one loss, so it's a little hard to comment on them. UConn, number one overall. They are beating Creighton at home right now, but while Seton Hall's been really good, things are lining up for UConn to win the Big East, which they did not do last year.
yeah. They had that big stretch. I think it was a 7-game stretch where they lost 6 games last year, and that was because players were dropping left and right, and to include their coach, who was out for a couple of weeks with COVID last year. But with that being said, UConn, they're the number one team in the country due to everybody's loss last week, right, Sean? We had 10 losses by top 10 teams to unranked teams, which I would say is unprecedented, but we've seen that a lot in the last couple of years. Um, so, UConn looks really good. I've been impressed, though, with Creighton, how they've responded since getting their teeth kicked in late in December. They're undefeated so far in the month of January, 4-0, and they're down by 4 right now to UConn as we approach the end of the first half in Storrs, Connecticut. So Creighton might give this a run for their money. The Seton Hall isn't ranked right now because of how bad their out in conference was, They had some bad-looking games, including that Rutgers one, but I would expect them in the rankings pretty soon with the way that they're playing right now.
Yeah, for both these teams right now, Mike, big games on Saturday. Creighton goes to the
Hmm.
Hall at noon, like you said, and UConn goes to the Wells Fargo Center to play Villanova. So, um, tough road games for there. Both teams have won a couple of them already, but I think we're starting to see we've definitely got a top six in the Big East, and that would be Seton Hall, UConn, Villanova, Creighton, St. John's, and Marquette. And then we've got a bottom five with Xavier, Providence, Butler, probably hanging. Maybe one of those teams makes the tournament, but definitely not more than one. And then Georgetown and DePaul, who you got to beat them, even if it's on the road. You can probably be okay if you do lose to a Xavier on the road or Butler on the road, because those teams are actually pretty good. But can't lose to Georgetown or DePaul, and only one team has so far. Georgetown has only one win, and it was against DePaul, so nobody else has lost to either of those teams, which is good for the health of the Big East. But at this point, I think UConn is probably going to win the league, but as the days keep going on and Seton Hall's still up at the top, they're going to be believing until they're not.
Yeah, and I would say, Sean, staying in the Big East, how disappointing Providence is this year now. They've lost 4 straight now to start the new year. And while the first 3 games were pretty close against Seton Hall, Creighton, and St. John's, they just lost by 20 points at home to Xavier, a not good team. Sean, we haven't seen that out of Providence in years. So big red flags coming up in Rhode Island right now.
Yeah, I feel really bad for the Friars because it seemed like they just started to figure things out, and then they lose their best player, Bryce Hopkins, for the year. Yeah. And then Devin Carter, who is a great defender, but he is just not a first option. And, he's a good shooter, and he's a good defender, but, it took him a little while to just even be the one of 2 options with Hopkins, but now he's the only one, really. Aduro is a big guy who's really struggling to find, or not struggling, he's doing well, but I think the physicality of the Big East might just wear him down a little bit. So Providence at this point, things were rolling there for a minute. We had them up in the top 4, Mike, but it is really just a tough blow to your best player, and then things kind of fall apart at home against a Xavier team who has struggled a lot this year. Providence does play DePaul tonight on the road. Got to win that. Favored by 10, so hopefully they can get a W in the right direction there. So, Mike, our third topic today is going to be about a conference that we probably don't talk about enough, but they have shown that they deserve to be talked about. That would be the Mountain West Conference. At this time, they have 6 teams that are probably in the NCAA tournament if the season ended today. While they may not get one better than a 5 seed, there are 6 really good teams in this conference at this point, and UNLV was able to beat Creighton, and they're not even in those top 6. So talk about the Mountain West a little bit and how surprising they've been in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, when you rank the conferences, Sean, where do you rank the Mountain West right now? I think you probably rank them 3rd or 4th. This has been a surprisingly really good conference this year, and part of that is you've definitely got a top half and a bottom half. That top half has been phenomenal. We saw what Colorado State did at the start of the year. They're not 2-2 in the Mountain West Conference. San Diego State, who are the runner-ups from a year ago, they were 19th last week, and then they lost by 18 on the road to a good New Mexico Lobos team. Nevada, we've talked about. Nevada, we kind of discounted TCU because of their loss to Nevada in the Diamond Head, but they've been nothing but impressive since then. But they lost to Boise State. And you've only got one ranked team right now in the Mountain West. But all 6 of these teams would be in the tournament, Sean, if things ended today. And that's not going to happen. You probably will end up with 3, maybe 4 teams from the Mountain West getting in. But it's going to make for an exciting NIT for the Mountain West as well, because you're going to have a lot of teams playing postseason basketball.
Yeah, and I think so of those 6 teams, Mike, that we mentioned, only one of them has more than 3 losses. That is Boise State. And they played in the ESPN Events Invitational, took losses to Virginia Tech and Butler. They went on the road to play a good Clemson team and lost. And then they went on the road and lost to a Washington State team. So it's not like their losses were to, bad teams, to power conference teams, and none of them were at home, which was good. And they were able to knock off, a St. Mary's team, who we'll talk about later, and they beat a VCU team who's leading the Atlantic 10. So at 12-5, they're certainly
Colorado State. Yeah,
they're certainly in a good spot, but. And the bottom half of this conference is probably not as bad as normal. You have the Air Force at 0-4, but they're 7-9 overall, and San Jose State at 8-10, and Wyoming at 9-8. I mean, these are not going to be. These teams are going to pick off wins. They just are. They're good enough, which might hurt the amount of bids, but at this point, 6 teams are feeling really good about where they're at, and if one of them might not pull away for the conference title, which will probably keep them off a protected seed line. But 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 seeds, look for them to be littered with a lot of Mountain West teams. And UNLV in that 7th spot, they are 9-7 overall, but they definitely can make some noise. They beat Creighton, like we said, and they just beat Boise State on the road. So,
yeah. And Sean, you take a look at Colorado State, for example. Colorado State, they've struggled in their last 3 games. They were 13th in the country. They've lost 2 of their last 3. But that game that they won was against the Air Force Academy, who's the bottom of the conference. But that was all the way to an overtime performance. Air Force Academy took them deep on the road in Fort Collins. So Colorado State, they're struggling right now. I think the panic button's hot, but it goes to show that this is anybody can pick anybody off in this league.
Yeah, you probably can't be a good team and limp to a 3rd or 4th place finish like we have seen in this league over the years. Isaiah Stevens on Colorado State, probably the Mountain West Player of the Year. Utah State able to still be in the top 25, and they lost their point guard to Creighton. San Diego State won on the road in Gonzaga. So there are so much to be excited about for the Mountain West, and when your team's game is done on Fox Sports 1 and there's a Mountain West game at 11 Eastern, might as well continue to watch it, because it's going to be deserved to be watched. So Mike, the last topic that we have today is about the West Coast Conference. Not a good reason that we're talking about the WCC. Gonzaga is 11-5 at this point. Certainly the worst team that they've had in years. And St. Mary's is 13-6. There's a real chance, Mike, that the West Coast Conference is a one-bid league, which might make the tournament more interesting at the end of the year, because, it's been a cakewalk for St. Mary's and Gonzaga to the finals, and then it's been around 3 where they've already played twice, and they're both going to the tournament no matter what, so it doesn't really matter, but looks like that is going to be a much more meaningful game than in the past.
Yeah, and the West Coast Conference is a smaller league this year, just 9 teams due to some departures outside the conference to include Brigham Young. But like you said, Sean, this is probably a one league bid because of how bad Gonzaga's played. Now, there is a scenario where I think San Francisco can go on a run, lose 2 games in the regular season of the conference. Gonzaga can come close to winning out in the conference schedule, and you got 2 teams on the bubble. But aside from that, I don't think you see a scenario where this is a two bid league. Gonzaga might get a little bit of a benefit of the doubt from the committee because of the past, their past success, and them essentially being a blue blood in college basketball. But I think unless they win their conference championship, they're probably not getting a bid to the big dance.
Yeah, there is a scenario where they could win the conference by 4 games and lose to St. Mary's in the championship game. But there are no signs there's no signs that that's going to happen right now. I mean, they've lost at home a couple times this year. They lost on the road to Santa Clara, and that was the first time, I think, in 26 chances that that Santa Clara has knocked them off. They stormed the court, but Gonzaga's got a
fighting Steve Nash's.
Yep. The Southern California trip, Pepperdine, San Diego, it's Thursday and Saturday. Got to win those at the very minimum. But something to keep an eye on, because St. Mary's and Gonzaga at this point in the year are usually 15-2 with a couple good wins and tournament locks essentially, but that's certainly not the case this year. So Mike, a couple of picks as we wrap it up today. Obviously no games today because they are being played later. We're going to go all the way to Saturday for our picks, and we're going to start with your Baylor Bears on the road to Texas. Now, obviously, Texas still has to play before then, so they could be in a real desperate spot if they do lose to UCF. But what do you see happening here?
I was dogging on my Bears earlier with a really, really painful loss last night. I think they're going to bounce back on the road in Austin. I think you're going to see a nice little Baylor presence there. So I'm going to say Bears by 8.
Yeah, I think for those who remember, I did predict Texas to win this conference at the beginning of the year. That's not going to happen no matter what. I am going to predict them to win this game, though. They need it badly, and if they do drop it, I think the path to the tournament becomes much narrower. So I'm going with the Longhorns, Max Asmus legacy game. Longhorns by 4. Yeah. Two Big East games that we talked about earlier, Mike. Creighton on the road at Seton Hall, noon Eastern on FS1. I'm going to go with the Pirates to move on. They've just got magic in the crowd. They get after it defensively. And, Creighton just seems like a team that will fall into the trap of playing iso ball all the time, and that's exactly how Seton Hall likes it.
Yeah, I think you got to go with a hot hand on this one, Sean. I'm going to agree with you. I think Seton Hall gets the job done and improves to 7-1 in the conference.
All right, Mike, we've got a ton of games here, so we can't do them all. Going to 6 o'clock Eastern on ESPN2, the BYU Cougars go on the road to play Texas Tech Red Raiders. Who are you going with in this one?
Man, two exact opposite schools here. We've got Tech Trash versus the good boys and Brigham Young, but I'm going to go with the Red Raiders in this one. They're so energized with their new head coach, completely new team. So I'm going to go with the Raiders.
Yeah, I agree. I think Lubbock is one of the tougher places to go in the Big 12, in a conference of really tough places to go, and BYU has never gone there, to my knowledge, in a conference game,
nope.
Especially on a Saturday night. So I'm going with the Red Raiders too. Finishing up Saturday on FS1, 8 o'clock Eastern, the number 1 UConn Huskies go down to Philly to play Villanova. I'm going to go with the home team again. Villanova gets the job done, cements themselves in the NCAA tournament, and they came real close last year to knocking UConn out, but they ultimately didn't. This team is better. Justin Moore is back. I'm going with Villanova.
Yeah, I want to pick Villanova in this one, Sean, but keep it interesting between the two of us. I'm going to pick the UConn Huskies. They're the number 1 team in the country for a reason. This is an explosive team, and they're poised to repeat for a national championship, so I'm going to go with the Huskies.
Last game of the weekend that we are going to pick, Mike, is an SEC battle. 8:30 on the SEC network. Chris Beard's Ole Miss Runnin' Rebs head down to play Bruce Pearl and the Auburn Tigers. Giving the Road Dogs any chance?
I think this is actually going to be a good game. Ole Miss has responded really well after getting kicked in the teeth at Knoxville in Tennessee. With that being said, I'm going to go with Bruce Pearl's team. I'm going to go with the Auburn Tigers in this one. They have looked incredibly well of late.
Yeah, I think this is a big game for Ole Miss. I don't think they really have to win it, but I think they have to hang because they're hearing everything about how they've played such an easy schedule and how all they've done is blown out bad teams. Well, here's a chance to prove that that's not true, even if you do lose. Have the result in doubt at the end of the game, and who knows where it'll go, because Auburn has crushed everybody that they've played, but they don't have a quad 1 win yet. So big opportunity for both teams. I'm going to go with the Tigers too. I watched them kill my Indiana Hoosiers, and they have not lost since that Appalachian State game that we happen to bring up every time we mention Auburn. But Ole Miss is losing by 2 at halftime on the road at LSU. Really hope for them that they can turn that around and get a W there, because LSU is one of the lower teams in the conference. So, Mike, that's all the picks for this week. That is all the topics that we have. We're trying to keep the episodes shorter. Helps the algorithm. So be sure to like and subscribe. And Mike, I think that's all we have from today. We'll see you next week. See you next time.